First off, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know it's hard to carve out some time on a busy Friday, so I think that this is definitely an important topic that we all need to learn a little bit more on. I am definitely excited today to introduce y'all to Leslie Boudreau for all of the reasons. I consider her my friend, which is very exciting. And so I personally know how amazing she is, but also she is a wealth of knowledge on this topic that seems to affect everybody all the time. Not only is Leslie a registered technician, but she's an RVTG, which is an extra layer of education. So she really knows what she's talking about. She is currently the vice president of the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association, which I find to be a feather in her cap. She also served on the AVMA's task force that created the tech utilization guidelines that we're all referring to. So she literally is the expert on this topic, which is why I'm handing it over to her to talk because she's got it.
Oh, thank you, Megan. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Granite Peaks, for inviting me to speak to you today. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about. So let me share my slides real quick here and we'll dive in. And as far as questions and things, I've got a lot of info to share. I'm totally happy to stop and answer questions, but I do want to get to the end and provide you guys all of the information possible. But stop me, throw out any questions, or we can have a little Q&A session at the end. So I'm going to explain to you throughout this presentation why this title is Crisis or Crossroads. And I think you'll see when we get to the end of this why it's really kind of a pivotal time right now for credentialed veterinary technicians, and also understanding.
Is properly connected. How the fuck do you do that?
Is that somebody coming on to me about my sound? No? Okay. Just making sure I'm hearing sound coming through my headphones. But all right, let's get into it, guys. So learning objectives, always really important. We're going to break this down into 4 sections. I'm going to give you a history of credentialed veterinary technicians in the United States. And then we're going to dive into the economics of technicians and utilizing them properly. And then what a lot of people want to know is, how do you get them? How do you hire them? How do you keep them? And maybe how can we answer that big question about, is this crisis or crossroads? And then we're going to do some review and questions at the end here. So let's move through. So I am a veterinary technician, as Megan mentioned. I am a registered veterinary technologist. So that's where the little G comes in. It just means I have a bachelor's level education to get my credential. Doesn't mean that my credential is any different than anybody else that holds a credential. It just means that the educational path I took to get me to the credential is a little bit different. There are more, since I became a technologist, there are more and more technologist programs. So 4-year bachelor's level veterinary technology programs. And I love seeing that. So there's a lot more. The little G part is a little bit potentially controversial because again, an RVT is an RVT or an LVT is an LVT. But when you see that little G, it does mean that there's a little bit different educational background. So history of credentialed technicians. I'm going to try not to date myself, but I'm going to give you some background that's going to date me just a little bit here. So let's look at what is a credentialed veterinary technician. And I don't know who's on this presentation, so I don't know if you're a veterinarian, if you're a credentialed technician. I don't know any of the things about you. And I am not, my intention is not to insult somebody who uses the term veterinary technician and is not a credentialed staff member. But if I use the term veterinary technician, I am using it to talk about credentialed staff. There is a difference. There's some states that anybody can be called a veterinary technician. The state that I am coming from, California, we have title protection. And that's an important thing to know, is that it's something in your state, because there are practices that kind of lump everybody together. But when I use the term veterinary technician, I am referring to credentialed staff. And the difference between a credentialed person is they're going to have an AVMA accredited background. They're going to have taken a national examination called the VTNE. When I became a technician, again, this is a little bit of the dating of myself, I took a state exam. I never took the VT&E because at the time my state used their own examination. And you're either, when you get credentialed, you're either going to have CVT, RVT, LVT, or if you're from Tennessee, you're that lone state that credentials with an LVMT. And there are some grandfathering in place, that there's still some credentialed technicians that used a grandfathering aspect to get their credential. Most of the grandfathering options only happen at the beginning of credentialing in a state, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Or it was, there's very few states that allow grandfathering currently. So vet techs are awesome people. And most people who went into veterinary medicine or became a technician is because people are gross, right? I had a little stint in a nursing education and said, hey, I don't want to do people, but I love animals. And the technicians are just compassionate people, and they just, people aren't their thing necessarily. The funny thing, of course, is all of us that are in veterinary medicine realize that the animals don't bring themselves into the hospital. Although we did have a little dog run in the other day through the front door, a stray dog, but 99.9% of the cases, the pets are being brought in by people. So you have to have some people skills to that. But what is a credentialed technician? They have to have a skill set when they graduate school in order to be eligible to take that VT&E or that national examination. And so there's a long list of skills that they have to be trained in. Now, do they come out experts? Do they come out like a very seasoned technician? No, just like a newbie nurse is not, a 20-year experienced nurse. There's going to be growth after graduating, but there's all sorts of things that they're learning in school. Human nursing, I mentioned nursing a little bit. They are well ahead of the veterinary technician profession in the history. And this is where we get into kind of timelines and understanding what's going on with veterinary technicians right now. In general, the credentialed technicians and credentialing of technicians and educating of technicians, veterinary technicians, is about 100 years behind the nursing profession. Nursing profession started in the late 1800s, and that's about 100 years before, a little bit more than that. So here's a timeline. I love this piece. It was put together a few years back to illustrate the growth of technicians in the United States. And I'll shout out Veterinary Team Brief, who put this graphic out. And I'm sharing that with acknowledging that this was from their publication. But if we look kind of in the middle of the timeline, I don't really have a good pointer, and I'm not sure if my mouse will work here, but it wasn't until 1972 that the AVMA, or the American Veterinary Medical Association, even said, hey, we've got this group of people that are working in our practices and we need to make them professionals. Let's vote to do some sort of education and then credential them. That was 1970s. So where I'm going to date myself is I was alive in 1970, and back here in 1960, when the first 1963, when the first graduating class of a program, and I shout out to New York because New York had the very first kind of veterinary technology program, but there wasn't a credential that went with it. So they were kind of before the times, and it took almost another, not century, but another 10 years to actually come up with a credentialing path for them. So we were educating about 10 years beforehand. But really, this is a new profession, right? So it's little over 50 years old, right? It's not that we're young. And there's a lot of change happening, and a lot of the growth and the pain points in this profession are because of how young we are. The nursing profession went through the same thing. So just think of this as a new profession with a lot of growth ahead of us. So veterinary technician credentialing by state. This graphic is a couple years old, and things have changed, which I'm excited to point out here. So the colors broken down by state, showing you which states use LVT as their credentialing, which states use RVT, which states use CVT. And over here, this lone little Utah state was one of the only states that didn't have any sort of credentialing. But they did finally pass it 2 years ago, and they are in the process of grandfathering in the group of people that were working as veterinary technicians to become credentialed. So they'll have to take the VT&E, they'll have to apply. But shout out to Utah for finally making that path. But there's a lot of states here with the stripes, and those are states that don't require credentials, which is really still very sad. Now, Minnesota, where's Minnesota? I think this is Minnesota over here. Minnesota just this year, 2024, has created a path to credentialing, and they're just in the process of working through that. But when any state starts credentialing, they grandfather in, but that grandfathering has like a ticking time window that you got to do it within usually like a 4 to 5 years, and then that grandfathering window closes. So if somebody became credentialed from grandfathering, it's just a very short window that they have to do that. But across the country, you can see is kind of a hot mess in we don't use the same titles. Every state kind of does their own thing, and that has created some real problems. So the AVMA used to have a really good chart of the states and where they were at with credentialing. So I took a screenshot of this. This is California, and it basically would say, this is what a veterinary technician can do in California. This is their level of supervision. These are their specific job tasks. Because things are changing so rapidly, the AVMA went away from this cool chart. Now, if you go on to the AVMA, and I think, I'm not sure if the slides are going to be made available to you guys after this presentation, but I'm happy to share them. But I have some links in here. Now it takes you just to that state. Like if you click on California, it would take you to a link where you could do some investigation and find out this information, but you kind of have to go through every state one by one, where it was really nice to have an old chart. AVMA just couldn't keep up with this amount of change that's happening to keep their chart up to date. So they just changed the way they refer to it. But every state is different, and wherever you're located, you need to know what a credentialed technician can do in your state. You need to know if there's title protection. You need to know what specific job tasks technicians can do. And if your state is one of those that still doesn't support credentialing, I'm going to encourage you to get on the bandwagon to help make that happen. So let's look at, again, we're looking at where are technicians now. In 2021, these were some very sad numbers to me. As a profession, the median pay, so median is not average, median is the middle, but the middle was $17.72 an hour for somebody that has gone to school, has typically gotten an associate's degree, may have gotten a bachelor's degree. That was definitely in 2021 not a living wage. And that number hadn't really changed a whole heck of a lot. However, there's some information on this. This comes directly from the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, and you can look at, for any profession, you can look at where things are. But it is saying, or it was saying in 2021, the job outlook was there was much faster than many other professions, so that the outlook was incredible for veterinary technicians. There's going to be a lot of jobs. In fact, we're looking at 17,000 jobs being created over a 10-year period, not even including, just normal attrition and hiring that's happening. Well, fast forward to 2023, and just so you know, U.S. Department of Labor statistics are usually like a year behind. So these are the most current information right now on the website. Is 2023 numbers, and we're in 2024 because we haven't finished 2024. But the median pay has jumped up, and that is really good to see. This is just a 2-year period, and we're looking at approximately a 16% increase. Now, for those of you hiring veterinarians, you know that is also a factor, that almost all of our positions were paying higher wages for. Just everything is going up, right? Inflation and things. So if we actually look at what the inflation level was, this amount of increase goes along with what the inflation, because inflation was 7 to 8% over the last few years. It's come down a little bit, but this makes sense. it's still for a professional, educated job, these wages are still too low. And that's part of our issue with hiring as well. But the number of jobs that are currently in 2023, it has gone up, and it's even grown where we're going to need basically 19%. We're growing like 19%. That's crazy. Most professions don't grow that much. So the demand for veterinary technicians is remaining strong and has gotten even stronger over the last couple of years. So what can a veterinary technician do in a veterinary practice? Or, this isn't limited to veterinary practices. So there's education, higher learning, there's industry, there's laboratory, there's all sorts of ways that veterinary technicians can work and positions for them. But basically, a veterinary technician can do anything that a veterinarian legally can delegate them to them. And every state, again, is going to have some hopefully job-specific tasks that only credentialed technicians can do. But they do so much in our practice. So part of good utilization of technicians and part of understanding the role of a technician is knowing who does what in practice. So veterinarian has three main roles that are kind of their lane, right? So they can diagnose, they can prescribe, and they can do surgery. That's what a veterinarian should be doing. Now, is drawing blood one of those things? Is taking x-rays one of those things? So if your veterinarian is doing some of those things that could be pushed down to their credentialed staff, there's a utilization problem. And that's where we have to kind of make that shift and that change to think about how we can best utilize our technicians. Now, this presentation today is not all about utilization. Well, there's a little bit of utilization, but I could talk for hours and hours about how to best utilize staff. But just understand that you can do a quick utilization assessment by just looking at the tasks that are being done every day and do they fall into that category. Now, veterinary assistants and non-credentialed staff are very important. They're a significant part of our team. But let's look at the credentialed technicians. They have jobs that they can push down to their non-credentialed and assistant team as well. And there's ways for us to professionalize those team members as well. So a lot of people don't realize, and I bring this up just as an informational component, that there is a way for veterinary technicians to even be more educated and to specialize. So there's currently 16 different specialties that are recognized by the AVMA and NAVTA, which is the National Association of Veterinary Technicians of America. And that this makes a technician who has to go through this rigorous process and education and testing and ability to maintain this specialty very educated and trained at a much even higher level. So just know that there are not only veterinary technicians with like a bachelor's level education, but also those that may even have gone beyond that to become a specialist. So like a dentistry specialist or a nutrition specialist or emergency critical care, anesthesia. There's all sorts of ways for technicians to specialize. So going back to kind of where technicians are, this is a little bit older graphic because I would imagine that a registered nurse is probably making more than $65,000 a year. However, that was a national average. This is from 2019. But I want you to just see that in the nursing profession, the human nursing profession, there are roles and titles that go along with job responsibilities to say who does what in a hospital setting and who does what in a human medical setting that specifies who should do these things and what their level of education and experience are. We kind of lump everybody together. We have assistants and we have credentialed technicians. But in human medicine, it's really specific on who's doing what. That's not the way that it's happening really in the veterinary technician profession. So I mentioned creating a professional, not necessarily stepping stone, but professional levels of your other staff, maybe your non-credentialed staff or your veterinary assistants. And there are approved veterinary assistants in my state. We have a certified veterinary assistant in California. And this gives some basic information and training and education to those staff members, and may also create a stepping stone for them to say, hey, this is a starting point. But if you want people on your team to be a profession, you got to give them the training behind it. So I mentioned showing, what the labor statistics have been, but this kind of breaks down up here, and you don't have to, the numbers are probably really hard to see, but just know that at the top of this chart over here, veterinary technician, who is a professional medical trained staff member, has the lowest average salaries compared to, if you go to like a human anesthesiologist who's making probably upwards of $500,000 a year. Now, that's a doctor level, but most of these here, like even paramedics and lab techs, make more than credentialed technicians. So there are the lowest paid medical profession, and that needs to change. And as I mentioned, the job growth is just crazy for veterinary technicians. So we need them. We have lots of positions for them, but we're not paying them, right? And that's going to become a factor here. So veterinary technician schools have kind of gone an up and down of numbers. In 2019, and the reason why I have a lot of 2019 numbers, Megan mentioned a couple things. So I was on an AVMA task force to look at veterinary technician utilization. And then I was on the AHA task force to create veterinary utilization guidelines. And I'm currently on an AVMA committee, the first standing committee to look at advancing veterinary technicians and technologists. So we use a lot of data, but we use this school data in 2019 to look at, do we really have a problem with, we don't have enough technicians, kind of like the question, do we have enough veterinarians? But we're looking at technicians right now. So in 2019, there was 203 vet tech schools, and that was the numbers have come down. And they've kind of continued to kind of go up and down because of economics and things. But if each school averages like 30 veterinary technicians that they were graduating a year, that would create about 7,000 new veterinary technicians a year. And if we looked at the projected job growth of about 21,000 jobs over the next 10 years, we would have enough graduates to fill that. However, we're not counting attrition. So on average, veterinary technicians only stay in the profession for 5 to 7 years. And that attrition is what is causing the shortage. So they either, and there's a lot of reasons, I'm going to look at some of the reasons, based on some surveys that are done. But if we're not paying them well enough to stay in the profession, they're going to be leaving. And that is a major factor. So we've got the graduates coming out of the veterinary technician schools. We just have to keep them. We got to find a way to keep them. Okay, so we are hiring. I can't emphasize that enough, right? Almost every position in a veterinary hospital, we're looking for people, including veterinarians. So how do we get there? All right, I talked about this cycle, crisis or crossroads. So this is the cover of the NAVTA News. So at the time, this was in the late 1970s. Now, again, remember, that was the beginning of the profession. And it was saying that this was a profession in crisis, okay? Actually, I take that back. It was the early 1980s that this came out. Profession started in the 70s. So it's about 10 years in. And we talked about this cycle back then that said, why don't we have enough technicians? What's happening? And it's what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because if we have technicians and we're not paying them, they leave. And if we have technicians and we're not utilizing them, they're going to leave. And when they leave, it's just this constant circle of we bring more people in, but we're not paying them, we're not utilizing, and so they're leaving. And then veterinarians start to like train their own staff, and that devalues the credentialed technician. And so it's just this constant cycle that's going around. So it's a crisis that somewhere you've got, it's like a wheel, and there's a cog in the wheel. We got to stop it somehow. Okay. NAVTA, which I mentioned before, is the National Association of Veterinary Technicians in America. It's their new name that they changed, I think, in the 1980s and 90s. So they do surveys, and I'm going to use some of their surveys here. So this was a survey that was done, and got to get my screen out of here. There we go. Okay, this was the 2022 demographic survey. Whoops, I skipped one here. Okay, going back. All right, this was the 2016 demographic survey. So the top 6 most significant problems that credentialed veterinary technicians were facing, which is where we get this crisis wheel: low income, lack of recognition, underutilization of skills, but burnout, lack of career advancement, competition with on-the-job trained staff. So that was what was reported in 2016. Not much changed in 2022, right? You know, flip over another 6 years, and we still have these same problems: low income, lack of title protection, underutilization of skills. So this wheel, we keep talking about it so that, you know, the cover of the NAVTA journal in the 1980s had the same problems that we're still experiencing. And there's a new basically demographic survey coming out soon. They are redoing it for 2024. I expect to see a lot of these same problems on there, but the overall report hasn't been released yet. Okay. I have a colleague, a friend of mine, David Liss. He did a study as part of his master's program in 2020. And he looked at and did a really in-depth research project on job satisfaction and engagement with credentialed technicians. And there was a lot of information that came out of it, and I can't spend 100% of the time on this study. It came out in JABMA, so the Journal of the AVMA. But he looked at that if the technicians that were getting higher wages had much better satisfaction levels than the people that were not being paid well. Now, there was also some other factors of like utilization and titles and responsibility that impacted that as well. But just know that, again, these low salaries, these low wages are impacting our ability to retain staff. So here we go. We're at this crossroads of change. What can we do for our veterinary technicians? We need them. We want them. This is a growing profession that is going to impact us in this profession for years and years. We have to change somewhere in here, right? So we can't find vet techs. So we hire on-the-job trained people. Students aren't going to veterinary technician school because of what their experience, what they have heard is kind of what happens when you graduate, like you're going to have low wages. And vet tech students are coming out there's a lot of private schools with a lot of debt. And then veterinarians don't delegate to credentialed technicians. And then you've got compassion fatigue and burnout, and then they leave. So it's, again, as I'm mentioning, this constant, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What part of it can we change to stop this cycle? We got to get past this somehow. So let's move on to part 2. Let me explain to you why we can do better with our veterinary technicians and the wages and the salaries that we're paying them, and the way that we utilize them has been proven to have a huge economic impact on practices. So let's talk about some of these studies. I love the OAVT, which is in Canada, but they, have a very similar business model to ours, and they do a lot of great studies. So in 2019, they put out this study. It was very in-depth. They had a lot of good data, and it's kind of hard to see, but down here, and I'm going to give you kind of the highlights, but if for each extra RVT per veterinarian increased gross revenue, this is in Canada in 2019, so 6 years ago, increased gross revenues per veterinarian by about $78,000 a year. That's a lot of money. So some of the things that came out of the study is that, utilizing an RVT who is a trained expert in their, field adds a lot of value. It reinforced some of the other studies that were done that also said the same thing, that if we hired more credentialed technicians, we would have higher clinic revenues, but not just revenues, profit. So gross revenues don't, make or break us. It's our profit level. So clinics that employ more RVTs per veterinarian were found to be more profitable. And the higher the RVT wages showed higher gross revenues per veterinarian. So if you paid them more, the veterinarians made more. Seems weird, right? If you pay somebody more, the veterinarians make more because you keep your staff, they're more experienced. There's so many reasons why increasing wages will pay off in dividends. When veterinarians take on more RVT duties, right? So we said a veterinarian has 3 main roles: diagnose, prescribe, and do surgery. But if they're taking on roles that could be delegated to an RVT, the clinic gross revenues went down. So they looked at, if you called somebody a veterinary technician in your practice, did you get that same benefit? And the answer was clearly no. It didn't correlate. So if you gave somebody the title of veterinary technician and they worked for you before, what was different? It's the education that that staff member has that allows them to grow and become just a much more valuable person on the team. Again, I'm not bashing an on-the-job trained person, but we have proven with these studies that it takes a credentialed, educated person to get these economic values to practice. So this came out with, they basically looked at different levels of gross per full-time equivalent doctor. So the lowest levels, I mean, this would be a pretty low level that full-time equivalent veterinarian is bringing in about $284,000 a year. But what we looked at is if they were a low producer, it's because they had less staff. They didn't have a credentialed technician to that doctor. And so it was very clear that practices with more non-DVMs per DVM, so that included other staff. And I circled reception because reception also had a correlation here, but you can see the big change for RVT. So the highest producing veterinarians had 1.14 person. I don't know where they get the 0.14, but they had at least a credentialed technician per doctor. And again, adding more reception and other staff members also impacted this, but we're looking at the value of the technician. Okay. Not only Canada has done studies, so the AVMA has over the years done a lot of studies. One of the things I found being on the task force and the committee is some of the AVMA studies were a little skewed, especially the earlier studies, because they didn't specify credentialing. If the practice said, I have these many veterinary technicians, they weren't asking about their credential level. But once they started asking about the credential level, we started seeing these same kind of trends. So in 2009 in the US, we saw $93,000 for each credentialed technician brought in about $93,000 more revenue than somebody who didn't have that credentialed technician. So the value of a technician was huge. So we looked at the labor statistics, and I think at $21 an hour, you're paying a technician about $45,000 a year. But they're making for you about $93,000, and that was 2000. This is 2009 numbers. So imagine with inflation, this is much higher. We could absolutely be paying our staff more to get that value back to practice. So as part of my role on the task force, we also looked at, hey, let's talk to hospital managers because they hire, right? And we developed a survey that was a partnership between AVMA and the VHMA, and we looked at what practice managers thought of veterinary technicians and utilization. Now, this was just repeated, and I wasn't able to get the numbers in time, but I know because it was very interesting that it was almost the exact same results and not too much later, right? So we just repeated this at the end of 2023, and that was, again, only about 4 years later. So practice managers didn't know if their state had title protection or not for veterinary technicians. About 40%, so about 4 out of 10 didn't know. So there's a lot of kind of misinformation or lack of information amongst our practice managers. So if you do not employ any credentialed technicians, we ask this question, what was your main reason? And as we would imagine, about 61% of the practices said it's because of lack of supply. A few said, oh, they cost too much, but that was very few. And there was also a small spattering of people who said they didn't need one, which I would beg to argue. So again, utilization, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but there's a difference with how practices utilize their staff to the value and the benefit they get from their staff, and a direct correlation into whether they retain their technicians. So if they are on the low side and their technicians are relegated to cleaning kennels, restraining pets, just taking care of instruments or answering the phone, these are not highly utilized staff. This is the reason why credentialed technicians leave. But if they're in the mid, high to high, where they have autonomy and trust and empowerment, collaborate with the medical decisions, maybe in a position of leadership, and think of their role as a profession, we have a huge change in retention, well beyond the 5 to 7 years. That comes with respect and salary as well, but just in the utilization factor, it makes a big change. So this has been all in the news, right? So from in 2019, again, we, where is this here? Anyhow, this task force here. So task force came out in 2019, and it has morphed into the standing committee where even the AVMA has recognized, like, our credentialed technicians are partners, and together we have to make a change. NAFTA is doing great things in relationship to bringing out all of the issues and concerns facing veterinary technicians and helping to advance them. But partnering with the AVMA has been super important because we've got to get that down to the veterinarians and the practice owners and the managers and the other team members about the role of the credentialed technician. And so this has been all in all of the veterinary news, forums and the ways that we communicate. We're talking about this, and there's a reason, because we need to retain our staff members. I'm not going to spend too much time, but again, our task force made recommendations, and although I can't specifically share every recommendation with you, these are the main areas that recommendations were made, and there's a link to, you can go on, find this on the AVMA website, but all sorts of things contribute to the utilization of our technicians. All right, how are we doing on time? Ooh, got to keep going. Okay, part 3, big question. What everyone wants to know: how do we hire? How do we attract? How do we retain our staff? And how are we solving this crisis? So we know that technicians are important, but did you know all of these other things, that our clients appreciate our technicians because oftentimes they provide better education. They talk on a level that most clients can understand, and clients comply more when they have a good relationship with their technician. When we have technicians that are well utilized in our practices, we have increased engagement, we have decreased turnover, the pets get a higher quality of care, we have improved outcomes, and all of these things have been shown to be true. And for many practices that struggle to have enough appointments for staff, or for staff for clients to get their pets in, utilizing their technicians allows a bigger bandwidth to see more patients. So pets get better care and have more access to care. So this is a screenshot of me doing a quick search for veterinary technicians in the United States. And this was on LinkedIn, and I got almost 21,000 results of veterinary technician ads. So that's telling you, and we know this, that everybody's looking for one, right? Where are they? How do I get them? So if you're looking for a vet tech, we know that we're going to continue to need more of them. There is a high geographical variability. So there's definitely higher concentrations of veterinary technicians in more urban areas, areas that pay higher salaries. We have seen signing bonuses being offered. But if you're looking for a vet tech, what are you doing to make this happen? Is there a vet tech school nearby, or even an online program that you can partner with to become either a mentor for new technicians, a teaching hospital for new technicians? We partner with probably 4 or 5 different veterinary technician schools, so that we're getting their interns. We have a constant flow of potential technicians coming through our practice that we can, hey, show off. This would be a great place to work when you graduate. So come see if we have a position available. If you're really struggling, you're going to have to connect with maybe some other organizations, your VMA, professional organizations that technicians are a part of, like NAVTA, your state associations as well. And the most important thing is, if you can't find them, can you grow them? So, do you have any sort of tuition reimbursement plan in place? Do you have a way of, there's a wonderful book that I love. It's called Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. So, are you talking to your veterinary assistants about, hey, what does your career path look like? And we want to help you grow and stay with the practice. We would invest this time with you. We're happy to either support you at the end of your schooling with a bonus, or we'll give you some tuition assistance or maybe book assistance, whatever that looks like for you. But to have that conversation with them is that we want you to stay and we're willing to partner with you. Maybe it's just making a flexible schedule so they can go to school. What does that look like? All right. Advocacy and education is really important. So if you want to retain and attract veterinary technicians, you got to have some. So you want to show on your website, hey, look at all of our credentialed technicians. This would be we respect them. We have them, and we want you to join us. But advocating for the importance of veterinary technicians also makes you a desired workplace. And there was a campaign that was done. Again, I mentioned I love the OAVT. They are so pro veterinary technician. But they had a campaign where you would post a placard that we have an RVT on site. And are you telling, on your website, are you sharing through social media the value and the contribution of veterinary technicians? Because if I'm a veterinary technician looking for a job, I'm stalking your social media. I'm looking at how, oh goodness, they don't have a single credentialed technician on their, website. Why would I want to go work there? So you have to be part of the support of technicians, value technicians, and show that off. So isn't it time that we, as somebody is as part of the veterinary profession, create a path for our veterinary technicians like other medical professions, and value the fact that we want trained, educated staff. So if I went to the hospital and I've got my grandma there, and the person who's taking care of my grandma was the same person that was doing, and again, I have nothing against being a janitor, but janitor requires no education for that job. And if the janitor was the person taking care of my grandma, what is my expectations for the quality of care? So why is it acceptable for us to hire somebody off the street, put them in the role of a medical professional, even with some oversight? Like, that's not okay. We wouldn't accept that for our own human family members or ourselves. Why are we accepting it in the veterinary profession? Our pets and the level of medical care for pets has just changed and morphed and grown and is at such a high level. We need to have those professional people working in our practices. And so it's just a challenge for me to understand why this continues in veterinary medicine. And, the old adage of, well, I can't find them, so, this is just the way it has to be. I don't think that in that scenario, the effort has been put into value them and truly work to grow or create an environment that somebody wants to work in. So how as anybody in the profession, what can we do to affect this change? How can we change the cycle of veterinary technicians just leaving and this not being a career path for them? So you have to support veterinary technicians, in your practices, in your individual businesses. If you are in industry, you have to support the practices and the veterinary technicians that are currently there. Give them all the resources. But the state of New York had a pledge that their practices and hospitals could make to say, this is what we support veterinary technicians. This is what we're doing to make sure that this profession continues to grow. And so something like this on your website talking about how you support your team members is a great thing to do. Education, again, through your social media, whatever that looks like, signage in your practice, introducing the staff as an educated, credentialed person, supporting title protection is very important. There are many corporations and individual practices. I just used Banfield as an example here that have created the whole technician appointment. And again, hopefully they're doing this with credentialed staff, especially if that's a requirement in their state. But creating a value, creating a revenue stream, creating access to care for patients by creating a technician appointment. And it could be something as a nutritional consultation with somebody, a credentialed technician that has that passion or that extra training in nutrition to have these long conversations. Again, the veterinarian is delegating something off of their plate to a trained, passionate member of the team, and then creating that engagement for them and that utilization that keeps them on the team. So other ways, there's a lot of companies that have used credentialed technician for telemedicine and teletriage. And so technicians have avenues to use their education in some of these new platforms. So I had to bring this up real quick. Looking at my time, we're almost there. But the election happened this week. We're not going to go political and talk about results, but in the state of Colorado, there was a proposal for a mid-level practitioner. All of these veterinary organizations said, heck no, we are opposed to this for many reasons. They put it in front of the constituents, not even veterinary professionals, and said, hey, do you want this? And it passed, guys. 52% of the population said we want this mid-level practitioner. Now, do they truly know what they were getting into? Do we truly know how this is going to play out? We're creating a position in Colorado only, Colorado, that has to have an educational component, it has to graduate, it has to be licensed in Colorado, but can do these things that no veterinary technician, no other position has been out there for. So the jury is still out on how this is going to play out, but is this the beginning of a change across states? That is still to be determined. I've got some, opinions about this particular program because it actually wasn't designed for technicians. And that's kind of a whole nother story, but it was designed for people who wanted to go to vet school and they didn't get in. And so how did Colorado's educational system capture those people and give them a lower level position? So it wasn't really designed for veterinary technicians, but there could be veterinary technicians that go down this path. So we'll still see how this plays out. So, all right, we're going to break the cycle. We're going to understand and value our credentialed technicians, understand the role that they bring, understand how we're going to keep them and retain them by valuing them, by utilizing them, by paying them what they deserve to be. So sometimes the crisis creates this good change. So even though we're in a crisis, can this help us come out of it to a better place? I hope so. So what can you do? I'm going to give you some suggestions. These are my take homes with as an individual. Know what the laws are in the state or in the states that you practice or that you, are wherever living in or working in, and know how you can help. So there's probably credentialing initiatives in the state if there's one of those striped states and you don't have a path to credentialing. But understand, be informed. That's kind of, that's lesson number one. You need to know and understand what that role is. If you are in a leadership position, you have the ability to create protocols, create SOPs that encourage the better use, kind of the best practices of utilizing veterinary technicians in that practice, and allow the technicians to complete tasks that are part of their scope of care and take away that other stuff in the veterinarians. Like it's just we know doesn't make financial sense for them to be doing that. Encourage title protection, encourage a career paths in your practice, support your veterinary assistants to get them credentialed, show them you value them, and what does that look like? So can there be leadership roles? Encourage them to join and be part of their organizations. If there is a state technician association, pay for that, support them, encourage them. If it's part of the state VMA, encourage them. Are they members of NAFTA, the National Association? These are things that would help show that you value them. You show that it's a profession and you want them to be at the highest level. And give them the responsibility, make our career ladders within the practice, utilize our credentialed technicians for all sorts of roles within the practice and leadership positions. So as a team, right, we all know the team acronym, together we all accomplish more. And that's using our team to the highest level of their abilities. So we've gotten to the end. I think we have a few minutes for questions. I appreciate you guys all listening to this and wanting to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, because it is going to take, right? It takes a village to make change, and that's where we're all at. So thank you again to Megan for inviting me and Granite Peaks for having me. And I hope you guys found some value into this presentation. And if there's any questions, let me know.
Y'all can just jump in if you do, other than where do I hire technicians, right? Because we talked about that. Let's see. Anybody?
I have one for Leslie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great. So I'm working with Granite Peak and don't yet have a practice, and I'm not a vet. My wife is actually the vet, but I was something I came up with a little bit ago, and I haven't actually run it by Granite Peak yet. But what are your thoughts on putting vet techs on a compensation model that's similar to the vets like ProSal, the production salaried hybrid model? Obviously it might be more of like a production wage hybrid, but something like that encourages revenue generation.
So there is a lot of ways that can happen, but their entire job is not going to necessarily work for that
Okay.
model. So it
Right.
does depend on the type of practice. It does depend on what their specialty is. But if you have technicians that are doing, maybe they have, and I use nutrition because that's one of my passions. So I used to do a lot of nutritional consultations. And so as part of my compensation package, for every one of those nutritional consults I had, I got a bonus because it
Nice,
was
yeah.
well beyond my regular duties. And it took a lot of time. There was a lot of, face-to-face that I needed to work with the veterinarian to develop a nutritional plan for this patient. But it was beyond kind of the regular scope of duties of the other credentialed technicians. So veterinarians
very good.
drive the revenue in most, in our business model right now, in most practices, veterinarians drive the revenue, and everything that the veterinarian generates pays for all of the staff. But there's certainly ways to bonus the efficiency of your staff and encourage efficiency, encouraging upskilling and additional, CE things and new skill sets. But it would be hard to bonus them on services that they're doing that are being pushed to them by the veterinarian, because they don't have a lot of
Right.
control over that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the areas that I think it might be more easily applicable is like those tech appointments that you brought up.
But even then, tech appointments are generally, the veterinarian will say, hey, come back in 1 month for, I want to do a liver profile, or, this is a monthly injection you're going to get, and, come back and you can see our veterinary technician for those appointments. Still
Right,
being
so it's
driven
still
by the veterinarian.
right. Gotcha.
But if they have an extra skill set, now dentistry is a great example that you may have some, in my state, California, our technicians are legally allowed to extract teeth. And so our veterinarians lean the heck out of them, because, hey, their hands are tired, and they love the fact that they have this professional that can help them out with these procedures. So my dental techs get a lot more money than, some of my other, RVTs, because that is a skill set that they have grown. Now, we've supported them. We've sent them for additional education on, but that is a higher leveling and having, like, this is your basic RVT skill set. This is level 1. And then level 2 is you have these skills. Level 3 is this. And then if you get a VTS or a specialty, then you have higher pay scales based on their skill set. That is another way to compensate them for their education and their abilities.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't know if you're seeing this, Leslie, but Jen just asked that she's got a CVT who just got a VTS in dentistry. How can she incorporate the knowledge into the practice? So GP only, don't do cohorts.
They don't do cohats? And she's a...
Oh, wait, we do.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Okay. I'm like, that seems, 70% of, pets walk through the door with periodontal disease. So I would imagine there's lots of cohats happening in a GP. Yeah, I would definitely, for us, and we spell this out, so our technicians know, like, this is the pay scale that we have. This is what we, how we increase the wages. But if you want to make more, this is a skill sets that can take you to a different pay scale. So for a VTS, we would reward the heck out of that, because we would utilize that person, one, in training your other staff, get your other staff, bring them up by the bootstraps, so to speak, and teach that skill set to other colleagues of theirs, and get everybody super efficient, that if you can increase and do 1 more cohat a day, awesome, right? That is a revenue generator for the hospital, because you have that capacity. The ability to do quick whole mouth dental x-rays on any pet is a skill that saves so much time, better safety for the patient. So yeah, that should be rewarded, and a VTS level should have a different pay scale for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna
Did
be
that
respectful.
answer the question?
There you go. Thank you. Yes. Just to be respectful of everybody's time, Leslie, I know you gotta jump. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, thank you, Leslie, for your wealth of knowledge. I think we all have some good takeaways that hopefully we can incorporate. If you guys need CE, don't forget to email events@Granite Peak CPA, and we will get you your CE certificates. Leslie left her information if you have any more questions, and then we are always here to help. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great
Thanks for
weekend.
having me.
Bye.